This is Economic Systems and Institutions Section C lecture. Our prioritized standard is Economic Standard 16, and objectively you'll be able to compare and contrast the three main types of private business organizations. An economic institution is an enduring organization, practice, or relationship established by people to cope with basic economic problems. So essentially, economic institutions provide support for a type of economy, any type of economy for that matter. There are certain types of economic institutions, with some types existing only in certain types of economic systems. Labor unions, which use collective bargaining, are only in democratic industrial countries like the U.S. and have been associated with improvements in workers' wages, benefits, and also working conditions. Also, private ownership of property. This is a basic institution that's going to only be found in market economies like the United States. The U.S. also has very specific economic institutions like households, which are individuals or family units which buy goods and services from firms. Also, we have private firms, and we also have banking. We'll talk about banking another time. Now, the household is the typical unit of consumption, which earns income by owning and selling productive resources. So, meaning, most of the time when people are purchasing things, it's usually family units that buy those things. And those family units usually make money by selling their services to someone else. It's possible that the government could buy things, other businesses could buy things, but most of the time households do the buying. The profit-seeking private firm is the typical unit of production, as is the typical unit of production in most market economies. Although government agencies do play an important regulatory role in the economy, and some government enterprises actually produce goods or services directly. Stuff like the TVA used to be government-owned, the Federal Mint, Amtrak, the Postal Service, bus lines. Moral of that story, there's a lot of things the government does in fact own. There are three main types of business organizations for private firms in the United States, which are sole proprietorships, partnerships, and also corporations. Now, sole proprietorships are businesses owned and controlled by one person. These make up about 71.5% of private firms, but account for only about 3.9% of private business revenue. These are 2008 numbers, if you care. The numbers don't change much from year to year, though. So this tells us a couple things. There are a lot of sole proprietorships, but they don't make a lot of money. So 71% of all of them, but only 3.9% of all the money. Some of the advantages of a sole proprietorship include ease of startup. You can start these up very easily. Full control. You decide what happens in your business. And also exclusive rights to profit. You don't have to share your money with anyone. Some disadvantages, unlimited liability. So if you get sued, there is no limit to how much they can sue you for if you own a sole proprietorship. Also, you have sole responsibility. You decide what happens, which also means if things happen badly for you, well, that falls back on you too. Also, limited growth potential. You have very limited ability to expand your business with this type. And also lack of longevity. So if an owner dies or becomes disinterested in the business, well, that's the end of the business. Another type of business organization are partnerships, which are businesses owned and controlled by two or more people. These make up about 10% of private firms, but account for only about 14.8% of private business revenue. So if we pay attention to the last one, there's a lot more sole proprietorships, over 70%, compared to 10%, but these actually make a lot more money, 14.8% compared to 3.9%. Advantages of partnerships include ease of startup. It's very easy to start these up. Specialization, meaning there's two owners now, so you can actually divide up the task. Shared decision making, which goes in with specialization. And also shared business revenue, which is more beneficial if you're more of a silent partner, but it's still an advantage. Some disadvantages, unlimited liability. So if something bad happens at your business, you get sued. There is no limit to how much you can actually be forced to pay back if you are sued. Also, potential for conflicts. You might butt heads with your partner and therefore make it hard for your business. Also, there's a lack of longevity. So if one of the partners dies or becomes disinterested, oftentimes that's the end of the partnership. Now, the third type of private business organization are going to be corporations, which are businesses owned by many stockholders or part owners, but operations are controlled by a board of directors, which are in fact chosen by the stockholders. So many people own this, but many of the people that own it have zero say in what actually goes on in the business. So these types, corporations, make up about 18.5% of private firms, but account for about 81.3% of private business revenue. Wow, that's a lot of money. So again, these make about over 80% of the money, 10% of the money, less than 4% of the money. So these by far are the most successful, but the ones you'll see the most of, you'll see the most of these, over 70%. Then you'll see this second place, this coming up third place in the number of them. But again, this is most successful or least successful. Corporation, some advantages, limited liability. So if your corporation gets sued as an owner, there is very little they can do to you. Worst case scenario, if your business goes out of business, you lost whatever money you paid for the stock. You don't actually lose anything else. Also, separation of ownership from management. So let's say you want to own a business, but you know nothing about business. Great type of business for you. Also, easy to raise monetary capital. They can raise money by selling stocks and bonds, which we'll talk about in a moment. Also, stockholder flexibility. So if you want to sell some of your ownership in a corporation, you can do that. You cannot do that in the other types, though. Longevity. So long after a founder of a corporation dies, business carries on indefinitely. There are some disadvantages, however. It's difficult and expensive to start if you want to go through this process. Thousands and thousands of dollars worth of legal fees commonly. It's going to take a lot of time to do that. Also, government regulates them closely. Government cares a lot more about what happens in a corporation than they do the other types. Also, there's a slow process of decision making, so it takes a long time for corporations to make decisions. There's also a lack of control for stockholders. If you've got lots of great ideas, corporation might not be the place for you, because if you're not on the board of directors, they really don't care very much. And also, corporate profits are taxed twice. So corporations have to pay corporate income taxes before they give you your share of it. When you get your share, then you have to pay individual income taxes. So essentially, those are taxed twice. Unlike sole proprietorships or partnerships, corporations have many methods for the expansion of their business. Corporations have the option of raising monetary capital through the selling of stocks and bonds, which can be traded, bought or sold, by investors through the stock market or the bond market. Now, a stock is part ownership of a corporation and can be either common or preferred. As where a bond is an interest-paying loan by an investor to a corporation that can be either a bearer or registered. Technically, these are considered corporate bonds, as there are also going to be government bonds that we'll talk about in a future unit. Additionally, a corporation can expand through a merger, or sometimes called a corporate combination, which is when one corporation joins with or absorbs another corporation. So there's a few types of corporate mergers. One of those is a horizontal merger, which is a merger between companies producing the same good or service. So for instance, if Kmart, a retailer that no one goes to, merged with Sears, a retailer that no one goes to, that would be considered a horizontal merger. Now, a vertical merger, this is a merger between companies involved in different production phases of the same good or service. So for instance, if Walmart merged with Equate, which makes a lot of the more generic brands at Walmart, that would be considered a vertical merger. A conglomerate merger is a merger of companies producing unrelated products which can result in subsidiaries. So for instance, if the Walt Disney Company decided to merge with ABC and Marvel and Star Wars and virtually everything, I guess, that's considered a conglomerate merger. Now, speaking of subsidiaries, these are just a few examples of just a few primary parent companies that own many, many different things that still operate under their own names, which is what a subsidiary is. It's a smaller business that operates under a bigger business, but they still kind of do their own stuff. If a corporation makes a profit, then the profits can be distributed out to stockholders in the form of dividends or reinvested back into the corporation. Now, a dividend, this is corporate profits that are distributed proportionally to stockholders based on how many shares of stock are owned. Now, reinvestment of profits, this actually enables the corporation to use the profits to help the business expand. There are other forms of business organizations in the US and throughout the world, including franchises, nonprofit organizations, multinational corporations, and cooperatives or co-ops. A franchise is a type of business where a franchisee, which is a person or a group at the local level, pays a franchisor, which is the large parent company, the right to start a business using the franchise name and selling its product. So these are a lot of examples of franchises. So there are going to be benefits to doing this. Talk about that in a moment. Franchisees, should point out, must pay franchise and startup fees and royalties to the franchisor. Now, royalty is a percentage of the profits. So you have to pay. So on the local level, you have to keep paying McDonald's in the beginning to call yourself a McDonald's, and then you keep having to pay them a portion of your profits. Now, why would you do this? Well, franchises can actually make it easier to start a business with a proven reputation. Although there is actually going to be a lack of freedom for a lot of franchisees. So there's pros and cons, although generally speaking, franchises make a lot more money than starting your own business. A nonprofit organization is a business that provides goods or services, yet pursues some goal other than profit. So some examples include things like the American Red Cross, American Heart Association, Goodwill, United Way, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Make-A-Wish, just name a few. So for the nonprofit, revenues can come from the sale of products or services or possibly from charitable contributions. They do not actually pay taxes, but any profits that they make must be put back into the business. So you're not allowed to make a big fat profit with a nonprofit. Multinational corporations are corporations that have facilities and other assets in multiple countries other than its home country. To truly be considered a multinational, at least 25% of revenue must come from foreign countries. Due to globalization, multinational corporations have actually dominated global sales. Now, multinationals actually face criticism for lacking ethical standards, often manufacturing in areas with very little regard for human rights or environmental standards for that matter, and contributing to the decline of small businesses, which have difficulty competing against these multinationals. Final thing we'll talk about is a cooperative or a co-op, which is a business owned collectively by all members of the cooperative. So if you want to go to a cooperative, generally speaking, that means you have to be a member of that. They don't let just anyone go. So lots of types of cooperatives, purchasing cooperatives, marketing cooperatives, service cooperatives. You can also have financial cooperatives. If you're a member of a credit union, that's actually a financial cooperative. All right, this concludes Economic Systems and Institutions, Section C lecture. Our prioritized standard again was Economic Standard 16, and objectively now you can compare and contrast the three main types of private business organizations.